The whole personality of man is indescribable. His consciousness can be described. His unconscious cannot be described, because the unconscious, as I must repeat myself, is always unconscious. And it is really unconscious. It really does not know it. And so we don't know our unconscious personality. We have hints, we have certain ideas, but we don't know it really. Nobody can say where man ends. That is the beauty of it, you know. Yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah. The unconscious of man can reach God knows where. There we are going to make discoveries.
Okay, so we've talked about the unconscious in a variety of ways, including the sort of pejorative way. The unconscious is something that interferes with consciousness. We have talked about the unconscious as creative and providing inspiration in dreams and in intuition that we just talked about. Now I want to go back really to the original question that we began this hour, which is how best to understand the unconscious. And for me, that means a metaphor. I'm into metaphors. Metaphors help me comprehend something, the whole of something, instead of just the parts, to put it together. I want to leave you with what is the best way to really think about the unconscious and its influence in our lives. Different people have suggested different metaphors. There's the computer metaphor that I mentioned earlier, and in a way, if you want to think of the unconscious as an aspect of the computer, let's say the operating system that is well below the surface of the GUI interface and your mouse that you manipulate, objects on a screen, deep below that are all the things that make that happen, and the unconscious is like that. Okay, it's a little bit of a dry metaphor. Another metaphor that is sometimes used is the metaphor of the brain. And that would be neuroscience is in particular very invested in getting us to, there is no unconscious, there's just the functioning of the brain. But the metaphor in there is, as I often tell my patients, when you think about the brain, there is no brain. I say that's like telling your car mechanic that, well, you know, there's something wrong with my car. And the mechanic says, I have no idea what you're talking about. Do you mean the electrical system, the braking system? All the systems are what's important. And the brain is the same way. The brain is not a brain per se. The brain is at least 12 different organs functioning independently because of evolution. That's the miracle and the problem of evolution is that it doesn't take the old away. It just layers the new things that evolve one on top of the other, like a legacy system computer that still has software from the 1960s, and no one is alive who knows how that works anymore. So the brain has these different organs with competing agendas and functions, right? I mean, you can talk about the amygdala, you can talk about the hypothalamus, you can talk about the hippocampus, much less the cerebral cortex. So what I tell my patients is that the miracle of the brain is not really that sometimes something goes wrong with the brain. The miracle is that it works at all with all these different parts working independently. But the central metaphor and the most useful, I think, is the one that is simple and most obvious right in front of us all the time. And that is the idea that the unconscious never really goes anywhere. And it's a little bit this idea of opposites, that it's not as if we're conscious and then there is no unconscious. The unconscious is there all the time. So the metaphor for me is actually the very same metaphor, in that we have the idea of night and day as opposites. Spoiler alert, there actually is no night and day. That is a completely geocentric perspective. Ask any astronaut and you will see there's not night and day. There is the reality of space and the shining stars that are there all the time. We only perceive night and day because of the rotation of the Earth as we make our turn into the brightness of the sun, which blocks out the stars. But the stars haven't actually gone anywhere. The stars remain even when the bright light of consciousness makes it seem as if we live in a daylight world. But we actually live in the universe. We actually live in space. So an image that Carl Jung picked up is the Latin word the scintilla, from which we get our words scintillate. And actually, technically, scintillate refers to an astronomical phenomenon called scintillation of stars. We would call it the twinkling of stars. And again, the answer is stars don't actually twinkle. The scintillation is a result of changes in the atmosphere and all the filters we have to look through just to see the stars. When you're in space, stars don't actually twinkle. So the scintilla is an image that Carl Jung picks up from The Alchemist because he thought they were talking about the unconscious. And the scintilla refer to stars. You've heard of the scintilla. It appears in movies. It appears in common phrases that people use. This phrase, we're 1,000 points of light. That's an image of the scintilla. The scintilla are the lights on the Christmas tree. The menorah shining in the dark with a light that never goes out. The scintilla are the beautiful candles of the Diwali festival floating in the Ganges River. The scintilla are as simple as the lighters that people strike in a concert in the dark to create a sea of shining stars. There's a reference there and an idea that the scintilla present the possibility of making us relativize to our nice little planet Earth and shining in the vastness of the universe are other consciousnesses, that the ego complex is one complex among a multitude. And that gives me hope, and that gives me comfort. In the same way, the idea that our little planet is not alone in the universe, and that in the darkest night, the stars still shine. So that's the way to think of the unconscious, that the unconscious is the mother. I really love that image in Egyptian mythology of Mother Nut leaning over the whole world. And so she is the universe out of which we emerge. And when I say that that's simple and it's obvious, what I mean is that we literally emerge out of the unconscious as children. Ego consciousness, it appears in the research that the ego doesn't really form till about age 12. From 6 to 12, there are these steps along the way, and you begin to see that in a child, and prior to age 6, you can see that in your memories. It's really only islands of consciousness from time to time. For it to be consolidated takes a long time. And then, of course, we descend back into that from which we came, the unconscious. In the end, we become unconscious again, like a child. It's also the opposites of sleeping and waking, because we do that every night. We wake and we're completely aware of this other world of the unconscious. And yet then we sleep, and it appears as if the unconscious returns, but it's really only the bright light of ego consciousness that has created this experience of the background of our personalities seeming to disappear. And then it returns. So I want to leave that with you as a way to think about our original question as to why should one study the unconscious or learn anything about it? And I would say in our extroverted world, of course, all the energy and the money flows into the science of looking to the outer world. But the inner world is just as vast and stretches billions and billions of light years, as Carl Sagan liked to say, within us. And to understand that is to understand who we are and where we come from. That's what I want to talk about.